This meeting is being recorded.
There you go. For those that missed that message, the meeting is now being recorded. Alan is one of very few celebrities that doesn't require an introduction. Alan is, well, probably one of the most innovative SaaS developers out there, creating frameworks, solutions, developments. And for this particular event, Alan is talking to us about SASjs, a framework for developing applications and solutions on top of SAS. And when I say SAS, one of the innovative aspects of it, that it sits both on top of SAS 9 and VIA, a true innovation in the field and the industry. Without further ado, Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Vasily. What an introduction. Let me just share my screen. So what I've done is I've put the slides up on a GitHub Pages site. So if you go to slides.sasjs.io, there should be a link down to /Suguki. So yeah, feel free to follow up there afterwards. So who are we? We're 4GL Apps. We're a UK company, SaaS subcontractors, and we focus only on SaaS, nothing else. We've got a number of products, so Data Controller being the main one, and that's a data capture solution for SaaS. SAS Sensei, which is a quiz game for SaaS with 5,000 players, and SASjs, which we'll be covering today, a DevOps framework for SaaS. So in terms of what we do, we only focus on SaaS apps. So that could be modernization of AF-SCL or intranet, migration of SAS 9 web apps to VIA, or manifesting and supporting new apps or existing apps. So that's the intro. So yeah, today we're going to talk about SaaS solutions. So before getting into what we've got, well, how about the why? Why are we doing it? So all of you, I've seen a few faces here, very experienced SaaS developers. Probably some of this will resonate. So challenges you might have with a traditional SaaS solution. First of all, code management. So quite often you'll get developers who don't work with any source control. Every solution that you build is kind of built a little bit differently. You've got maybe catalogs or SaaS programs, macros in one folder, jobs in another. How does it all fit together? And also the testing. So there are some testing frameworks out there. I'll show ours, but what you can almost guarantee is that every solution will have a different approach. If they've even got a testing approach, probably I wouldn't hesitate to say actually most of the solutions I've seen don't even have any testing. So that's something that can be improved. Next up, the environment. So SaaS is licensed software. So usually it's only available on like one machine, or maybe you have dev test prod. And what that means is that everybody tends to work on that machine, which means that when you make a change, say to a macro or a job, that will usually affect everybody. Now, there are ways around that. You can kind of have like your own folder, but again, it gets complicated, and especially when you start using Git, because everyone will need their own clone, and how do you work with branching? And these are the kind of challenges you face working on a shared server. And finally, deployment. Quite often it's manual, and every site will have their own way to deploy things. And it's never usually that easy to get stuff from dev through test and into production. But to summarize it then, what I'm trying to say is that the fact that there is no standardized approach to solution development, not only does that make it inconsistent across projects, but also inconsistent across different people within the project in terms of how they contribute. And this all makes it takes it longer for a new developer to get onboarded. So the main diagram for understanding the SASjs approach is this one. And the paradigm shift is that rather than working on the SAS server, you work locally in an editor such as VS Code, where you can push and pull to a Git repository. You can have whatever branching mechanism you like, and then you create and compile your project locally on your local machine without SAS, and then you push it to SAS. So SAS then becomes like the runtime or the execution environment that you deploy to. So we built some tooling to make the deployment easier, and you can compile deploy for VIA, where it gets deployed as jobs, or SAS 9 EBI, where it's stored processes. And if you're running on base SAS, we've got a solution for that, SASjs server, where we call them stored programs. And the nice thing is you can build an app that runs on all three. You just compile and push. So for SAS developers, it's great because you can use whatever IDE you like. You've got local access to the terminal. You can use whatever local apps you want. You can even use things like Doxygen to document your code, and whichever Git GUI you prefer. As an admin, the nice thing is you've got nothing to do. You've got nothing special to provision. You don't need to give SSH to anybody or anything special. The few things that you might be asked to do is like give access to the folder, say in metadata or on SAS drive. You might need to set up permissions, which you might have to do anyway, or to the physical directory. Ideally for on VIA, as a developer, you'll want a client and a secret, so you can use the APIs. So that might be something you need to set up. Also on SAS 9, the way that the deployment works, it works using the on the store process server. It uses the underscore username, underscore password URL parameters. And by default, that doesn't accept encoded passwords. So there might be a config change in management console to accept encoded passwords through that mechanism. As a project lead, the big benefit is you can add a new developer to a SASjs project, and they will, just like in React or Angular or any other framework, once you know the framework, you can jump on another project and you get up to speed really quick. Because everyone's working from a Git repository and they can run in separate branches, that people can work in parallel without treading on each other's toes. So it's like the mythical man month, you can add more developers and not see such a slowdown in productivity. And because you can do everything goes through Git repository, you've got all that visibility, and because you've got this integration with all of the documentation capabilities, you get that as well. So you can kind of see what's going on. So the whole framework is MIT open source. You can fork it, you can use it for commercial reasons, whatever you like. We've had loads of downloads. A big chunk of these is our own test runs, but I think we do have a lot of genuine downloads. Lots of contributors, loads of repositories, and even the CTO has, he actually put this really well. So it's innovation that speeds development and integration productivity. And that's really what SASjs is about, is speeding up that productivity for SAS solutions. So that's all the why, but what even is it? So it's two things. First of all, it's an approach, an opinionated way of doing some SAS development. And that is supported by a whole bunch of tools. So a macro library, the SAS server if you're running on base SAS, VS Code extension, but mostly, in fact, the CLI, the command line interface. So the macro library, you've got hundreds of macros. They're all documented. Most of them are tested. And we've got macros, functions, and procedures for base SAS, specific ones for VIA and metadata and SASjs server. And they're all documented here on this site using SASjs doc. So you can install them by running that or also by setting your SAS autos. This library is also available, shout out to Bart, in the SAS packages framework. And yeah, it's all documented here basically. So you can like click through and see the definitions. So that's the macro library. SASjs server is a open source Node.js web server, full REST API that runs over base SAS. So you can actually run that locally on your desktop if you've got base on your machine or on the server. And it comes with a SASjs drive, SASjs Studio. There's an app store for deploying apps. It's not only SAS you can run, you can also choose to run Python or R or JavaScript. And we've also got LDAP authentication, permissions of different folders, and SSL, HTTPS, and you can also use it for load balancing. So you can have like a grid, so you can have like multiple of these running at backend. So the docs for that are all here. Shows you all the configuration settings. So we use this because it's cheap to run. So you can actually run SASjs server on like a $5 DigitalOcean instance with SAS on it. VS Code extension. So often with this, I get asked about the differences between the SASjs extension and the official SAS extension. We were out first, but regardless of that, The big difference is that the official SAS one is really geared around running SAS code and getting the results. Right now, it's just available on VIA, but they do have plans to put it on EBI. But I don't think they've got plans to support other flavors of VS Code. So VS Code is the Microsoft wrapper for VS Code. There's also Codium, which is without the Microsoft, and Thea. So SASjs will work on all of those, as well as all flavors of SAS when you include SASjs Server. But it doesn't just let you run code. You can also use it to synchronize like a local folder with a remote folder, and by that I mean a physical directory. Also the same for, in fact, logical ones. So you can put content synchronized up to SAS drive. There's a linter for quality checking the SAS code, and there's a, it's not on this list, but you can generate documentation, and there's a target manager. So the big thing is that for SASjs, the extension is about the tooling to facilitate the development of SASjs projects. So it's a lot more than just running SAS. Right, the command line tool. So as you can imagine, it lets you run SAS, run jobs, run flows. And then there's the compilation function. And I'm going to, at this point, I'm going to jump into a demo because this is fundamental to the approach. So whereas for a traditional SAS solution, you'll probably push all of your macros and your programs to a file system and then set them up with the SAS autos and etc. With the CLI and the SASjs approach, we create self-contained services and jobs and tests. What does that mean? It means that when your job or web service has macros or standalone SAS programs or even binary files, we put all of that content into each job or service or test. So the compilation process then creates these really longer SAS programs that then get deployed such that all of the SAS code is inside the metadata in the stored process or inside the job. So there's no need for a file system for all of those macros. You can also use this to synchronize physical directories and logical directories. So let's jump into a demo. I'm going to use the CLI to create a, I'll call it Saguki, with a jobs template. I could also, rather than use the create command, I could just clone the jobs repository. Where was I? Okay, so I'll change into that new folder I've created and open it in VS Code. This is like a sample project. I've got some jobs and some macros. And most importantly, I've got this SASjs config file, and this is what describes my project. So if I look at the job config, I can see, right, my jobs are in these folders. Go to jobs, extract, load, here they are. My macros, look here, they're in the macros folder. So also here it defines my targets, and a target is the place I deploy to. So I've got this via target with some properties. So to compile a project, first of all, I'm going to need to authenticate. So in fact, before I authenticate, I need a target. So I'm going to do SASjs add. I get some prompts. So local means that the target will be in my local project. I'm going to choose a via target. I'm going to give it a name, Saguki, and then application. 1 second. This needs to be specific because it's a shared server. Application is the folder in SAS drive where all of my content will be deployed. Server URL. And then authenticate, yes. So client ID. This is what your administrator needs to provide, client and a secret. And then you enter those two, and you can authenticate to get your authorization code. and that's it. And what's happened, what happens next is I can also choose my execution context. So I'll do the default. Actually, I'll do this one. This is a one I used before, which is a reusable one, so it should be a bit faster. And I'll set that as my default target. And now my, just close that and reopen it. My default target is Saguki, and this is the description of my target. So it's got the URL, the server type, the app lock, and the context name. It doesn't have the access token because that's not something that should go in source control. Instead, that goes to a .env file here, and then that is ignored in the .gitignore file. So that won't go to source to Git. So that's great. I've authenticated. How about deploying a project? So there's three parts to it. There's compile, build, and deploy. So if I do compile, SASjs compile, that will then look in each of my jobs and check what are the dependencies, such as the SAS macros. So if I go to the compiled make data 2 job in the SASjs build folder, I can see that this macro was extracted and inserted along with this freeform SAS code. And then here's my job, and then this is my post code. The post code is defined in, well, everything is defined in the SASjs config file. So if I look at the job config, I've got this term program, jobterm.sas. So yeah, this snippet is inserted at the end of every job. So you can see it's been compiled. I can also see my coverage, my test coverage. And yeah, I've got one file per job and test, all in this SASjs build folder. So that's great, but how do I get this to Via? Before I do that, I need to create a build pack. So if I run SASjs build, that takes all of those individual jobs and tests and creates this JSON file. And this JSON file contains all of the jobs. So it's just one JSON file with everything in. And so the final step then is the SASjs deploy. That's now pushing all of this content to this folder in SAS Drive. So if I go there, via demo group folder 4GL Saguki. So yeah, here it is basically. So I can open this. This is deployed as an actual job. So to execute this would normally be in the job execution web app. But I think I can view the source code at least. There we go. So that's being deployed. So to do that whole thing in one go, I would do SASjs CBD, which is compile, build, and deploy. So that's what you can do if you've got multiple users is each user can have their own target, developer, such that in your SASjs config, I would create, say, so that was Saguki. So if I wanted to have, say, my own personal target, I would copy this context, call it, I don't know, Alan, and then I would put that to an Alan folder, and then all of my project will be deployed to this one folder in SAS Drive. And that's how you can work in parallel. Right, so back to the slides. Quality control. So SASjs lint. What's a linter? A linter is something that looks at your code and analyzes against a bunch of rules. So we've got the linter in two products, one in the VS Code extension. So you can see here I've got this squiggly line, and if I look on the problems pane, it tells me the mend statement is missing. Now some rules like this one's pretty easy, so we've just implemented an auto format. So if I hit save, it adds the macro name. But other ones like insecure passwords, hit save, that's red, it's a problem, line's got an encoded password. So I can see that here in the extension. I can also run SASjs lint here on the terminal. It tells me where all the problems are in my project. So this line contains an encoded password. All of these rules are in the SASjs lint file. So no encoded passwords has the correct header, macro name, macro end, whether you've got brackets in your invocation, the indentation number, lowercase file names, max line length, no nested macros, spaces in file names, no tabs, and trailing spaces. I think there's a few more rules as well. They're all on the GitHub README. The nice thing about running this in the lint is that if there's a problem, it will have a non-zero return code. So if I try and say commit this to git init status git add commit -m test. That worked. Why did that work? If I check the git hooks, commit, pre-commit. For some reason that's not picked up the, probably something I need to run, prepare. Oh, here we go. I haven't set up the hooks. Okay, so now Git knows that my hooks are in the Git hooks. So in this hook, I've got a one that checks my commit message. Does it follow the conventional commit standard? And another one that says has the lint. So if I make a change to something, add that file, and then here we go. The pre-commit hook we ignore, it's not set as executable. I need to set it as executable. Change it to .git hooks. Invalid file mode. There. Here we go. So I was not able to commit this change because we've got problems in the repository. So in this way, you can stop people from pushing bad code, essentially, or well, I say bad, but one doesn't fit the rules that you define in your organization. Now you can ignore this by just putting the -n. So if it's really important, what you can do is part of your pipeline when you merge to say development branch is run this in your pipeline. So yeah, that's the lint. What else is there? SASjs doc. So SASjs doc uses, you need to install the docs again, but then you can just run this command and you get these documents. So if I go right click, open with live server, and here's project documentation. So if I click through into the jobs, just like on SASjs core, but with SASjs core is just macros, this has got jobs, and in the jobs you can define data inputs and data outputs. And what SASjs doc also does is convert these data inputs outputs into lineage, and you can generate this lineage diagram for all of your tables. And click on it and it takes you back to the job. And you can also, you don't need to install the CLI for this, you can also do it from the extension, and that's what this first button here is. Just click that, and here's the docs. And just to show that that works on any SAS project, I will go to, say, SAS packages. Coming up back. So So this should have a link through to it's got SAS code in it. This has a link to the other packages. SAS pack, here we go. So if I open one of these, I'll go base plus and then clone that. I've just picked a random SAS Git repository. I change into it and then do open VS Code again. This isn't got SASjs or anything, but if I open a SAS program, maybe I should have checked on this before I did it. It needs to have an actual SAS program in it. I'll try a different one that I know has SAS code in it. Chris Svensson. Okay, loads of SAS programs. I just hit this, and again, I get the documentation. Really easy. So that's SASjs doc. Right, SASjs test. So SASjs test, the way that you write tests in SASjs is you write tests for jobs and services and macros. So for instance, here's a macro. How would you write a test for it? You do filename.test.sas. So filename.test.sas, and in that test, you run some logic and then run an assertion. So this example is it's taking a snapshot of the macro variables, running the macro, and then comparing the macro variables to see if there was any leaky scope. So maybe it's not all got % local. So that's a macro test. If I look at a job, you can also do .test.integer.sas, and that will run the tests in a particular order. So here I run some SAS code, and I run this assertion macro. And all these assertion macros do, and you can write your own, they create a work table called test results, and it has variables in it like test results, test status, etc. And then that test result gets streamed back. So if I look at the test term file, where is it? Tests, job init, job term, tests, test term. It just streams that test results table back at the end. So if I run my test, I just run SASjs test. Every single test executes in its own individual job, or it could be a stored process. So you can see here it's running the test setup. Test setup is when you maybe set up your test environment. So you can have a test setup and a test teardown at the beginning before all your tests and afterwards. So yeah, so that's going to run and bring back all of those test results. After each test, yeah, you see here I've got a test URL. So if I wanted to, if there was a problem with the test and I wanted to rerun it, I can just copy that link and open it in a browser. And yeah, I can like debug it this way as well. All of the documentation for this and all of the stuff that I've shown you on the CLI is on cli.sasjs.io. You go there and look at the commands. This gives you all the detail. So yeah, that should be finished. There's also a video at the bottom here, which goes through the entire approach. Yeah, so that's an example of an error. And yeah, all of the test results go to the SASjs results folder. Here we go, we've finished. So this is the status of all of the tests. And then we've also got that exact same information in JSON format, CSV format, JUnit XML format, and there's also a coverage file as well. So yeah, that's the test approach. We've got a whole bunch of seed apps. So rather than having to create your app from scratch, we've got like a quick start for Angular, React, plain JavaScript. There's an Electron. The one I just showed you is just jobs. There's no front end. There's also one which is just documentation, and that just documentation one is also embedded in the Angular and React. I'll just show that one quickly because it's quite nice. And there's also a pages site. So we embed this in each app that we build. So you've already got like a framework for doing the developer guide, the admin guide, and the user guide. And this is like a static app with full search that you can embed into a web app. It can also be used for non-front-end solutions. A lot of the functionality is available in standalone utils. So if you are a developer and you want to use this stuff, you don't have to like copy paste it out. You can just call it directly from utils. And we've got a support channel on Matrix. And that's it. Didn't do so much for time. Is there any questions?
Yeah, we still have some time, Alan, and that's great. I don't have any questions in the chat, though. I've been keeping an eye on it. But what an excellent presentation. I do have a few questions from myself, and I would like to hear the answer from you. You just mentioned Electron as one of it, but I'm sure some people in the chat don't necessarily know what the benefit of running an Electron app. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I was introduced mainly through Electron through Analytium product, the SAS 9 API. And the great thing about the Electron is it's basically a browser on your desktop. VS Code is an Electron app. So believe it or not, this is a browser, and it lets you build front ends that can be deployed just like regular applications on a desktop and talk to SAS.
So that means that SASjs is not only for building web applications, but also desktop applications that look and behave like desktop applications, even that under the cover, it's actually the tech stack of a web application, right?
100% correct. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. You've covered everything that the software can do, and very impressive. Here's the question. Of course, if you can disclose it, I know I answered some of the question, but only if you can disclose it. Which of the clients or recent projects use the kit and what they benefited on the back of it?
So I spoke to the client, and they are okay with us talking about it. So yeah, in collaboration with Analytium, we did a AF-SCL modernization for DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, here in the UK. Other projects we've been working on Der Touristik in Germany. And we're collaborating with SAS Sweden, SAS Australia, SAS Belgium, and also in R&D in the US. And in the past, it's public Informa, Lloyd's List Intelligence have used this on their Via platform, and yeah, others that don't have can't reveal.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Paul just asking a question in the chat. Is it possible to see output tables, for example, in Work Library in VS Studio as well?
No, we don't. Yeah, so we're because all of this capability is in the official SAS one, so it's probably not something we'll invest so much in terms of like the output and the tables. But of course, if you do want to see like your output tables and you're running data controller, then you can see the outputs that way. I'll just really quickly show what that looks like. So yeah, this is you can basically make a change and you can like refresh and have a look at your tables this way. By the way, we just added a new feature to this app, which lets you load additional tables and view them on the same screen. So if you're like making edits, you can like do that whilst looking at other tables at the same time. And this is all using SASjs.
Excellent. And I guess it's worth mentioning that the data controller, while it has a commercial option, also has a free option as well, so anyone can use it.
Yes, yeah, it's free for 5 users, but we can also make it free for projects if you're a consultancy. Take it over using.
And my last question, unless anyone else has any other questions, you've mentioned everything that SASjs can do, but you also mentioned that you're actively developing it. What's on the roadmap? What's the next 5 greatest features coming up?
Great question. Well, the main focus now is on implementations and refinement. We've got no additional products planned. It's really just hardening, improving the VIA capabilities. We've got a whole bunch of issues that people have raised that we're working through. Just training, I guess, and improving the documentation. It's not, in the beginning, it was very much develop, but now we've been going almost 2 or 3 years. It's about, refining and hardening.
Makes sense.
The next big thing that we want to build is what I showed you about the compilation. So one challenge we've had is that some customers, to run the CLI, it's written in JavaScript, you need Node.js, and not everybody on your lockdown laptops is able to install Node.js, but you can install VS Code probably. So we're trying to move all of the functionality from the CLI into VS Code. So the next big thing will be to put the compilation feature here, and then you'll be able to compile without the CLI.
Excellent. Well, on that note, I don't have any more questions. No more questions in the chat or from me. Alan, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you on a SAS user group for UK and Ireland. Pleasure as always. Excellent work. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
The quick announcements, the next Suzuki event is in a month. It's still being planned. We don't have a speaker for that one. If anyone would like to volunteer and step up to be a speaker, more than welcome. We also can now host the events face-to-face in London in the SAS offices as well. So that's a possibility to have with a food and drink in the actual building as well. So any volunteers, do let myself know, Alan know, or Valeria, and we will organize it. On that note, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan.
Bye.